Chapter 30 Rescue. Nico was the first to make it up the rope, climbing quietly onto the main deck of the Fortune. Taking a moment or two to look around, he nodded to the others to indicate that the coast was clear and signaled for the others to come up. As soon as Caleb, Seth, and Zeke stood up on the deck, they all turned and looked at Caleb. "Well, which way?" Seth whispered. Caleb motioned to the stairway a few yards ahead that led down to the decks below. "Follow me," he mouthed to the others as Nico approached him and tapped on his shoulders. "Here, you might need this," said Nico, handing him a large knife. Caleb shook his head. "I've got one already," he said, lifting his shirt to reveal one of the knives he had taken from the cave earlier that afternoon. "Good knife, I want one too," whispered Seth. As the four boys began to make their way to the stairway, they could hear the sound in the distance of the others beginning their attack on the docks. Much to Caleb's surprise, the decks of the ship were apparently deserted, with most of the crew apparently engaged in the attack below on the docks. Caleb and the boys slowly descended the stairs to the second level. They could begin to see the rows of cages on the lower level as they neared the bottom of the stairs. They could also see lights coming from several of the quarters on this deck and could hear voices coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hallway. Caleb motioned for the others to be quiet. "Seth, you and Zeke go on down this hallway, turn right at the end, then look for the middle door on your left. There you'll find the supply room. Look for the charges. They should be sitting in a covered cargo area to the stern of the ship," explained Caleb, sensing Zeke's confusion. "The stern is the back of the ship. Look for the light red blanket covering up several boxes. Wait for our signal, and then set the charges. Do you understand?" Zeke nodded. "I use these matches to start the fire." "That's right, just like we practiced earlier, and use the rope that Mr. Daniels gave you. The one soaked in lamp oil, understand?" "Yes." Seth tapped Caleb on the shoulder. "How do we know when to set the charges?" Caleb paused, and then he grinned. "When you hear all hell breaking loose down here, then set the fire and get out as fast as you can. Nico and I are going down that way." Caleb motioned to the other end of the corridor. "We're looking for the lockbox with all the keys, which is in the bosun's quarters on this deck," explained Caleb. "Then we are going below to unlock the cages and let everyone get out of here," motioning for the others to go on. "Good luck." As Caleb, Nico, and the others slowly made their way through the bowels of the ship, Caleb said a silent prayer to himself that Wilkes' information was accurate. Inside his quarters on the upper deck, Rolando reclined on his couch, taking small sips from a glass of wine to celebrate the end of a successful day. He had his eyes closed and was nearly asleep when he heard a loud knock at his door. "Come in," Rolando hissed, turning around in his chair. "Why, Mr. Rawson, what do you want at this godforsaken hour?" he barked. "Sir, the men have finished unloading the extra cargo and want to know if they can relax on the docks for a while tonight," asked Rawson. "Tell them to have a ball, but keep an eye out for Wilkes and Spencer. They should be bringing in the extra guns and ammo from the Elgin camp any moment now. I've had a long day myself, Rawson. I'm gonna turn in for the night in just a few minutes." "Yes, sir. I suppose you'd like to join in the evening festivities, am I right, Mr. Rawson?" "If it's not too inconvenient, sir," asked Rawson. "Yes, I would." "Go on then, join them. However, wake me up as soon as you hear from Wilkes," ordered Rolando. "Oh, and check in with our chief medic, Mr. Valdez, below in the infirmary before you do. See how our Mr. Montez is doing." "Yes, sir, I will," replied Rawson. Turning to leave, he thought of one last question. "Mr. Rolando, sir, what do you want me to do with those kids from the Elgin camp when Wilkes and Spencer return?" Rolando heaved a sigh, partially from exhaustion and partially from the effects of the wine. "I haven't decided yet, Mr. Rawson. We still need to fill our holds with laborers to take back to Havana. I'll make a final decision once Wilkes and Spencer return with the guns." Caleb and Nico slowly made their way down the corridor to the bosun's quarters, which just happened to be 2 doors away from the infirmary, where they could hear voices of 2 men talking softly. After first looking inside to make sure the room was unoccupied, Caleb nodded his head for Nico to follow. Caleb breathed in a deep sigh. as the room was exactly where Wilkes had told them it would be. The bosun's quarters were dark as Caleb and Nico entered the room. The only light they had in which to see with was the light from several oil lanterns in the corridor outside. Wilkes had told them the lockbox would be on the wall to the left of the door. Caleb could barely see it in the dim light. Having to feel along the wall with his hands, he found the box. Just as Wilkes had said, Mr. Dominguez usually left it unlocked, so he slowly opened it up. A couple of keys that had been loosely tied onto a nail just on the inside of the wooden door made a soft tinkling sound as he opened it. Caleb and Nico froze, stretching their necks out to see if anyone was coming to investigate from the other room. Fortunately for the two of them, the noise didn't seem to attract anyone's attention. Caleb felt around inside the box. There were several keys dangling off the hooks attached to inside wall of the box. One of them had to be the key to unlock the cages, but which one? No matter, he grabbed all of them and stuffed them into his pant pocket, reaching in to see if he had missed any. Suddenly, the two boys heard heavy footsteps coming towards the room from the outside corridor. Nico reached silently for his knife, pulling it out of its sheath as Caleb placed his hand firmly on the handle of his crossbow. They saw a shadow pass by outside the door to the bosun's quarters. "Well, Mr. Valdez, how is your patient doing in here?" Rawson called out from the corridor as he entered the infirmary, seeing Montez sitting up in his bed holding a cup of tea in his hand. "Why, Mr. Montez, you are looking better, sir." "No thanks to Rolando, I should say," grumbled Montez. "So, Rawson, fill me in on all I missed this afternoon, will you please?" "I heard there was a bit of excitement with some of the locals," asked Montez, sipping slowly on his cup of hot tea. Rawson took a deep breath and proceeded to fill him in on the details of Rolando's expedition and his run-in with some of the local clans in the area, along with their find of a large cache of guns and ammunition. Caleb motioned to Nico to follow him as the two boys exited the bosun's quarters and made their way back down the corridor to the stairs. Behind them they could still hear the men talking in the infirmary. As he and Nico made their way to the cargo deck below, they could see the cages. It was much darker on this level, since there were few lights on this deck, the only light being trickles of light from the deck above coming down the stairs, or a few soft glows from lamps at the ends of each section of the hold. Once down the stairs, Caleb waited as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. He could see rows upon rows of cages on both sides of the ship, as well as fore and aft. The cages in front of them were all empty. "Now which way do we go?" whispered Nico. Caleb shrugged slightly. "I don't know, flip a coin." Nico flinched slightly. "I don't have a coin." Caleb motioned to start with the cages from the bow of the ship. "Follow me." The two boys crept slowly and quietly past cage upon cage as they made their way forward. So far, all were empty. Just then, they reached a cage with someone inside it. Straining his eyes to see in the dim light, Caleb noticed several people in the cages who were sleeping on the floor. "Dang it," he thought, "I should have brought a lamp down here. We need more light in here, I can barely see," whispered Caleb as he saw Nico walk quickly back to the stairway and disappear up the stairs. "Nico," he whispered, "where are you?" He started to yell but realized better. A few moments later, he saw Nico again, holding onto a small lamp he had worked out of a holder in one of the corridor lamps. "Now you got some light," said Nico softly. Caleb nodded, motioning to the cages. As Nico held the lamp close to the first cage, startled for a moment, they could see that it wasn't anyone from their group. Whoever it was, this person was dressed very primitively as if in rags, and their skin was pale white. In fact, they couldn't even tell if it was a boy or girl. Caleb looked at Nico and mouthed, "Shadow people," softly. "They must have captured a few of them around this area," said Caleb, motioning to continue. Again, cage after cage was either empty or had someone inside that was unknown to them. Caleb counted about 10 or 12 so far. As they reached the bow and began to make their way down the other row of cages, they came to the first cage with someone familiar. "It's my Uncle Gray Eagle," whispered Nico, "and over here is Will's dad, Jacob." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys. As he began trying each key to see which opened the cages, Nico woke up the two men and began quietly filling them in on the plan. My uncle says that he thinks your friends are down that way a few cages. He believes they brought them in last, whispered Nico. Finally, Caleb found a key that worked, and then opened Gray Eagle and Jacob Waddy's cages as the two of them stepped out, groggy still from being asleep for several hours. Thank you, Nico's friend Caleb. We are injured, but we will help you if we can, whispered Gray Eagle. The four of them walked slowly down the row of cages, a few more, all empty, and then, Caleb! It's you, shouted Elsa, not realizing the need for quiet. Caleb tried to hush her, but it was too late, as the sound of Elsa's excitement woke up several of the other captives who had been sleeping in their cages, including Stephen, Mark, and Peter. Caleb frantically began searching for their cages in the dim light. Hold on, everyone, hold on, let me get the key. It's hard to see in here, exclaimed Caleb as he continued unlocking cage after cage. Over here, Caleb, called Stephen from up ahead. As Caleb opened his cage up, Stephen crawled out from the narrow opening. Hello, little brother, good to see you, said Stephen, stretching his arms out and yawning. Not much room in there, real cramped, said Peter, also stretching out his arms as well. Good to see you guys too, but we can't sit around and celebrate right now. You guys have to get out of here, insisted Caleb, as the noise and pleas for help from the others locked in their cages began to increase. Peter, I will finish getting the other cages open, if you can lead everyone else up to the deck. Can you do that? Caleb asked. Sure, Caleb, then what? Tell them to jump off the ship as soon as they can, and swim for shore. Take the ramp, I don't care. Just get everyone off this ship as soon as possible, insisted Caleb. Tell them to follow the moon, go west up the hill. Mr. Daniels and the others will pick them up at the top, explained Caleb, still trying to open the remaining cages as quickly as he could. Meanwhile, Nico was busy trying to get some of the lamps lit in the cargo hold so they would have more light. Rawson had been busy for several minutes in the infirmary, filling Montez in on all the details of their afternoon shore excursion with Rolando, when the three men heard noise coming from the deck below. Mr. Rawson, did I hear you say you had brought some captives on board the ship this evening? Asked Montez, sliding around in his bed to attempt to sit up. Yes, sir, we did. Well, Rolando ordered us to take some captives from the clans inland to hold as hostages, in exchange for them turning over all their guns and ammo, explained Rawson. We also ran across some of those tunnel people running around out in the woods north of here, while our third group made a trip north this afternoon, so we have a few of them as well. Valdez held Montez down by the shoulder. Gabriel, like I told you earlier, if you keep moving around like that, you're likely going to open your stitches and start them bleeding again. You've got to be still and lie down, ordered Valdez. Montez shot Valdez an angry look. I don't need a mother. Valdez shrugged. Very well, but I'm not stitching you up again. Montez and Valdez both jumped a bit as another series of strange noises could be heard from below them. Mr. Rawson, perhaps you better go below and see what all the commotion is about, insisted Montez. I think some of your captives are getting restless. By the way, where are the rest of the men? They are having a celebration tonight out on the docks, sir, explained Rawson, a bit sheepishly. A celebration? A little premature, wouldn't you say, Rawson? And where is Rolando? He's upstairs sleeping in his quarters, sir. Mr. Valdez, would you be so kind as to go and wake up Mr. Rolando for me, while Rawson and I go below and check on the cargo? Valdez heaved his chest and let out a sigh. You should rest. I know, I will after we settle this all down, insisted Montez, struggling a little to stand up. Valdez huffed, then turned around and left the infirmary. Very well then, go ahead and bleed out, see if I care. Montez stood up and looked at Rawson. Hand me my pistol, Rawson, the one sitting over there on the docks table. Let's go below and see what all the commotion is about. Caleb had nearly finished opening the last of the cages when he remembered the cages at the front of hold that had the strangers known only as the Shadow People in them. Stephen, Nico, follow me, insisted Caleb, turning to Peter again. Peter, you lead Martha and the others up the stairs like I told you and get them off this ship as fast as you can. Caleb, where are you going? Stephen asked. Up here in the front, I'll show you. Caleb ran up to the front 3 cages, the ones that he saw earlier with the shadow people in them. As they neared the cages, they could see hands sticking out of the cages, beckoning for them, pleading for help. "Please, you there, help us, please. Set us free too," pleaded the voices of the strangers with the white skin. "You speak?" "Yes, help us, please." "My name's Caleb, who are you?" "Are you the people from the tunnels in the old city?" Caleb asked. "My name is Wakara, and this is my brother Liam and my friend Prieta. Yes, we live in the old city up north. We were captured by these men, who use us as slaves. They have stolen many of our people to use as slaves. We were sent here to watch them, but then they found us." Caleb unlocked their cages as they stepped out of the narrow opening and stood before Caleb, Stephen, and Nico. Even in the dim light, Caleb could see their skin was a pale white and their eyes were tinged a slight red around their pupils. Other than looking somewhat thin and frail, they looked just as normal as anyone else. "We don't see very well in the daylight, but we can see in the dark better than you can. Let us help you," Wakara said, who looked to Caleb to be nearly the same age as himself. "Not so fast," ordered the loud booming voice of Mr. Rawson, who was now standing in the opening of the doorway behind them. Rawson stood holding his small pistol aimed at Caleb. "All of you drop your weapons on the floor and put your hands in the air," barked Rawson. "Mr. Montez, are you okay up there?" he hollered. "I've got it, Rawson," said Montez, escorting Peter and the others back down the stairs to the lower hold. "Okay, everyone, form up a line against the back wall," bellowed Montez, holding his pistol with one hand and nursing his wounded shoulder with the other. "Speak up, who here is the ringleader of this ragtag team of rebels?" "I am," hollered Caleb. "Bring him over here, Mr. Rawson, where I can get a better look at him." Rawson motioned for Caleb, Nico, and Stephen to walk around the cages over to where Montez was standing. Caleb leaned over to Nico. "Where'd they go?" he asked. Nico gave him a puzzled look. "Where did who go?" "You know, Wakara and her 2 friends, the ones from the tunnels in the old city?" Nico shook his head slightly and motioned all around them, puzzling Caleb even further. "Which of you is Caleb?" bellowed Montez. "I am," said Caleb, holding both his hands up in the air. "Well, young man, you've presented us with a big problem here this evening. We just can't have people running around in the middle of the night on our ship, setting our cargo free." "Your cargo?" "Your cargo happens to be our people, and my friends," exclaimed Caleb, moving towards Montez, taken aback somewhat by Caleb's defiance. "Rawson, are these here the same captives that Rolando ordered you to hold onto as hostages for the guns?" "Yes, sir, they are." "I see." "Okay," said Montez, fidgeting with his shoulder. "Well, I tell you what, you can take your friends with you and leave, but the others, they stay with us, including those 2 over there." "No, they all go with us," said an emboldened Caleb. "Sir, the tunnel people, they're missing." Rawson noticed the cages that held the tunnel people had been opened, but they were nowhere in sight. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, Caleb saw a flash of clothing, heard a strange whistling sound as Rawson was knocked to the ground. It was Wakara and several of her group, using the darkness in the hold as protection and their keen eyesight as an advantage. Wakara and her friends were able to maneuver behind Rawson and Montez. Stephen had seen Wakara's brother, Liam, jump out from behind Montez trying to knock the gun from his hand, but he was too far to make the jump as Stephen leaped for the gun that Montez was holding. Seeing the 2 of them roll and tumble onto the floor, Caleb shouted, "Stephen, no!" as the sound of a single gunshot reverberated around inside the cargo hold. The sound startled Wakara for just a second, who had just knocked Rawson's gun out of his hand and onto the floor, long enough for Rawson to reach down for his pistol. He picked it up and quickly took aim at Caleb. Nico, reacting instinctively, reached quickly into his tunic, grabbing the spare knife he kept hidden underneath, and in an instant, he took aim at Rawson as he threw his knife. It sailed through the air, plunging deep into Rawson's chest. Caleb ran over to where Montez and Stephen were now lying sprawled out on the floor. They could hear Montez groaning in pain underneath Stephen from both his shoulder wound, as well as having Stephen's weight falling on top of him. Caleb grabbed onto his brother's shoulder and flipped him over to see the stomach wound bleeding onto the floor. Peter, Martha, and the others gathered around Stephen as Caleb knelt next to his brother. "Stephen?" Caleb gasped as time suddenly seemed to stop. This wasn't supposed to happen, he thought. "It's okay, little brother," whispered Stephen, struggling to catch his breath. Caleb motioned for help from the others to get Stephen up off the floor. No, it's no use, Caleb, you must leave me here." "Get out quickly while you can, take the others with you," begged Stephen. "No, Stephen, we're not leaving you here, and that's all there is to it," yelled Caleb. "Well, son, I don't think you have a choice," said Rolando, standing at the top of the stairs holding his pistol in his hand, the very same pistol that killed Elijah Elgin earlier that afternoon. "I'm afraid it's time for me to deal with you first. You have been a real pain in my ass today. I can see you didn't bring me my guns, and now, well, you've disturbed my sleep and caused me to lose some more of my crewmen as well," hissed Rolando, cocking his pistol to shoot as he spoke. Rolando took aim at Caleb. "The rest of your friends here will make excellent workers for my company. And your girls, well, ha, laughed Rolando. "My sailors are quite a bit lonely after so long away from home. I'm sure they will appreciate the companionship. I may even have to go back and get some more of your lovely friends," continued Rolando, not hearing the clicking sound below him on the ground. Again, the shot reverberated around the cargo hold as everyone looked down and saw Montez holding the pistol that had been aimed at Rolando. They could see his shoulder was bleeding profusely. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," hissed Montez, grimacing with pain from his bleeding shoulder wound. Montez turned his head and looked over at Stephen, who was lying next to him a few feet away, struggling to breathe. "I'm sorry about your brother's son. I didn't mean to shoot him. I wasn't planning on it anyway." Suddenly they heard a shout from the top of the stairs. It was Zeke. "Hey, you guys, you better get moving. We heard the gunshots down here, and we set the charges like you said. They're gonna blow any minute. All of you better get going," Montez barked. "If those charges go off while you're in here, you're all dead." "Get out, now while you can," yelled Montez. Caleb turned to Nico and Peter. "Peter, Nico, you two get the others off of the ship. I'm taking Stephen with me," insisted Caleb, glancing over at Montez. "We can get you out as well." "Don't bother, son. I'll take care of myself. Right now, I'm the least of your worries. Just go," Montez added. Nico and Peter began directing everyone else up the stairs as Nico looked back and saw Mark Redding heading down the stairs. "Go on, Nico. I'll help Caleb." "Thanks for being a friend," said Mark. Stephen noticed Caleb reaching under his shoulder to lift. "No, Caleb, no, please, you can't. I'm too heavy to carry me off the ship in time," insisted Stephen, as Caleb tried to pick him up but struggled until Mark got in next to Stephen to lend him an arm. Between the two of them, they got Stephen up and began taking him slowly up the stairs. The others watched from the bank of the river, waiting as Caleb and Mark Redding slowly made their way down the ramp with Stephen between them. Just as they reached the bottom of the ramp, moments later, they all heard the explosion and felt the intense heat on their backs. Caleb, Nico, and Mark struggled to get more distance between themselves and the ship as they carried Stephen farther away from the shore, setting him down carefully on a soft bed of sand. "Stephen, can you hear me?" asked Caleb, kneeling next to him. Stephen opened his eyes and smiled slightly, fighting the pain. "I am proud of you, Caleb," he whispered, gripping Caleb's hand tightly. "Tell Mom and Dad I love them, and you take care of Martha too, and make sure that no one ever does this again to our families, okay?" "Okay, I will," replied Caleb, holding onto Stephen's arm tightly, fighting back the tears. "Just hang on. It's going to be all right, Stephen. We'll take you home and get you fixed up there. Just hang on." Stephen shook his head slowly as his eyes began to close. "I'll pray for you," said Stephen softly as his grip on Caleb's hand loosened up and his eyes closed for the final time. As Caleb and the others stood on the ridge above the shoreline, still mourning the loss of Stephen, they turned around for the last time as they saw the Fortune burning from stem to stern and begin to slowly roll over into the water.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
We're under attack.